My father and my brother did that." Her voice was small, almost swallowed by the wind that carried dust across the yard. She stood at the edge of the ranch property, boots worn thin, dress torn at the hem, hair tangled from too many nights sleeping outdoors. She looked no older than 19, but her eyes were older than any soul had a right to be. The rancher had been repairing a fence when he saw her. He was a broad, shouldered man in his early 40s, with sun, cracked hands and a face that rarely showed surprise. His name was Caleb Turner, and folks around the valley knew him as steady, fair, and quiet. He didn't meddle in other people's troubles, and he didn't invite trouble to his door. But trouble had come walking up his dirt road anyway. She didn't step past the gate, just stood there, like crossing that invisible line might bring down judgment from the sky. "Sir," she said, her throat dry, "please, I need help." He set his hammer down slowly, measuring her the way a man measures a coming storm. "Name?" he asked. "Anna Whitlock." He knew the name, everyone did. The Whitlocks owned land east of the river. Her father, Thomas Whitlock, was a man people avoided crossing, hard voice, hard temper. His son, Daniel, was said to be worse. Caleb wiped his hands on a cloth. What kind of help? Her lips trembled. For a moment he thought she might turn and run. Instead, she whispered, "My father and my brother did that." She lifted her sleeve, bruises, dark and yellowing. Finger shaped. Caleb felt something shift in his chest, something heavy and dangerous. "Come inside," he said. Inside the ranch house, Anna sat at the long wooden table while Caleb poured her water. She drank like she hadn't tasted clean water in days. He placed a plate of bread and dried meat in front of her. She ate slowly at first, then like hunger had finally given her permission. He didn't rush her. When she finished, she folded her hands in her lap and stared at them. "They want me to marry Mr. Harold Pike," she said. Caleb frowned. Pike was nearly 60. "I said no." She continued. "I told them I'd rather work the land myself. Father said a woman doesn't own land. Daniel said I'd bring shame if I refused." Her voice cracked, but she forced it steady. "When I refused again, they locked me in the shed for 2 days, no food. Daniel came in drunk and said if I didn't agree, he'd make sure no one else would want me." She swallowed hard. "That's when my father stood there and let him. The room felt smaller. I ran that night," she said. "I didn't know where to go. And you came here," Caleb said quietly. She nodded. "You once paid fair price when you bought our extra cattle. You spoke to me like I was a person." He remembered. A girl standing behind her father, silent but watchful. Caleb leaned back in his chair. "Does anyone know you're gone?" "They'll know by now." He stood and walked to the window, staring at the open fields. Helping her meant crossing Thomas Whitlock. It meant inviting conflict. It meant choosing a side. When he turned back, his decision had already settled. "You can stay here," he said. Her head jerked up. "But understand this," he added. "If your father comes knocking, I won't hand you over, and I won't hide either." Tears slid down her cheeks, silent and stunned. "Thank you," she whispered. For the first time in days, she slept in a bed. The next morning, the Whitlocks came. Thomas rode at the front, Daniel beside him, anger riding harder than their horses. They didn't dismount before shouting, "Turner!" Thomas barked. Caleb stepped onto the porch, mourning. "Where is she?" Caleb didn't pretend not to understand. "Inside, safe. She belongs with her family." Thomas snapped. "She's not cattle." Caleb replied evenly. Daniel spat into the dirt. "You think you're some hero. She's lying. Women twist stories when they don't get their way." Caleb's jaw tightened. "She showed me the bruises." Thomas's face darkened. "That girl has always been dramatic." "Dramatic doesn't leave marks shaped like your son's hands." Silence hung between them. Thomas's voice dropped low. "This ain't your business." It became my business when she asked for protection. Daniel swung down from his horse, hand hovering near his belt. "You're overstepping." Caleb stepped off the porch, boots hitting the dirt with quiet finality. "If you set foot on this land without her consent," he said calmly, "I'll consider it trespassing." "You'd fight family," Thomas scoffed. "I'd protect someone who asked for help." Anna appeared at the doorway then, pale but upright. "I'm not going back," she said. Her father stared at her as if she were an object that had suddenly spoken. "You ungrateful child," he hissed. "No," she said, voice shaking but firm. "I'm your daughter, and you let him hurt me." Daniel lunged forward, but Caleb stepped between them. "That's enough." For a long moment it looked like blood might spill into the dust. Then Thomas grabbed his son's arm. "This isn't over," he warned. Caleb didn't flinch. "It is for today." The Whitlocks rode off, fury trailing behind them. Inside the house, Anna trembled. "They won't forgive this," she said. "I'm not asking them to," Caleb replied. Days turned into weeks. Anna helped around the ranch mending clothes, tending chickens, learning accounts. Caleb discovered she had a sharp mind for numbers and an eye for the health of livestock. She didn't laugh much at first. But sometimes, when the sun dipped low and painted the sky gold, he'd hear a faint hum from her as she worked. Still, tension lingered like distant thunder. One evening, Caleb returned from town with a grave expression. "Your father's been telling folks you ran off with me," he said. Her face went white. "He's saying I stole you." Anna's hands clenched. "They're trying to ruin you, maybe." Gossip spread fast in small valleys. Some neighbors avoided the ranch. Others came by under the excuse of trade, curiosity sharp in their eyes. One night, rocks struck the side of the house. Another morning, a fence post was sawed halfway through. Caleb repaired it in silence. "I should leave." Anna said one afternoon. "You've done enough." He shook his head. "Leaving won't stop them. It'll just tell them they were right." She looked at him then, not as a rescuer, but as a man standing beside her. "What if they escalate?" she asked. "Then we respond." The escalation came sooner than expected. A fire started in the north pasture. By the time Caleb saw the smoke, flames had already swallowed dry grass. He and Anna worked side by side, beating back fire with wet sacks, driving cattle toward the river. When it was over, acres were blackened. Anna's eyes burned not just from smoke. "They're trying to break you," she said. Caleb stared at the charred land. "They're trying to scare us." "Are you scared?" He considered. "Yes," he said honestly. "But not of them." "Of what?" "Of becoming the kind of man who answers cruelty with worse." That night he made a decision. The unthinkable. He rode into town the next morning and filed a formal complaint against Thomas and Daniel Whitlock. He brought the doctor who had quietly examined Anna's bruises. He gathered witnesses who had heard Daniel boast while drunk. In a valley where families handled matters privately, taking blood to the law was seen as betrayal. But Caleb didn't waver. When the sheriff rode out to question the Whitlocks, shock rippled through the community. Thomas came storming to the ranch that afternoon, alone this time. "You've doomed us all," he said. "No," Caleb replied. "You did that yourself." Thomas's shoulders sagged not in defeat, but in the first hint of consequence. "She's my daughter," he said, quieter now, "and she's her own person." Caleb answered. Weeks later, Daniel was arrested for assault. Thomas faced fines and public disgrace. It fractured the valley. Some called Caleb a hero. Others called him a meddler. Anna called him something else entirely. "Thank you," she said one evening, standing beside him as they watched new grass push through the blackened field. "For what?" "For not looking away." He looked at her then, really looked at her. The fear in her eyes had softened into strength. "I didn't do it alone," he said. "You told the truth." She smiled faintly. "That was the hardest part." Seasons changed. The ranch recovered, and so did Anna. One spring morning, she stood at the gate where she had once hesitated. This time, she stepped through without fear. Caleb joined her. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Regret what?" "Letting me stay." He thought of the fire, the threats, the whispers. He thought of the courage it took for a broken voice to say, "My father and my brother did that." "No," he said, "not for a second." She reached for his hand, not as someone rescued, but as someone choosing. The valley would remember the scandal. But it would also remember something else. The day a rancher did the unthinkable, not by drawing a gun, not by spilling blood, but by standing beside a young woman and refusing to send her back into silence, and in that refusal, something stronger than fear took root. It was called justice, and it grew.